The silence tonight feels different, doesn't it? Thicker, perhaps, like the world outside has pressed itself close against your window, just waiting. There are shadows that stretch beyond the reach of any lamp, and whispers in the quietest rooms. Tonight, we gather in that space where the familiar twists into something unsettling, where the things we think we know best become the sources of our deepest unease. Forget the comfort of the everyday. Turn down the lights, pull on your headphones, and let the quiet dread settle in. We have some stories to share. Stories that remind us how fragile our sense of security truly is, and how easily it can all fall apart. The recycling bins on Mrs. Gable's curb had been out for 3 days straight, overturned by some critter, and she still hadn't brought them in. That wasn't like her at all. Mrs. Gable was the kind of neighbor who had her lawn manicured every Tuesday, rain or shine, and her bins were always back by noon on collection day. I lived directly across the street from her, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in upstate New York, and had pretty much grown up watching her meticulous routines. My name is Alex, and I was 22, home from college for the summer, working a part-time job at a local diner. Mostly, I was just trying to save up for next semester and enjoy the quiet before heading back to the city. The first odd thing happened maybe a week after the bins started lingering. I was walking my dog, Buster, a scruffy terrier mix, around 7 a.m. Mrs. Gable was out on her porch, watering her petunias. Except she wasn't. She was just standing there, holding the watering can, completely still, staring at the flowers without moving the stream of water, poured onto one plant, overflowing the pot, soaking the concrete. I waved, "Morning, Mrs. Gable." She didn't acknowledge me, didn't even blink, just kept that blank stare at the saturated petunia. I figured she was maybe a little disoriented, maybe forgot her glasses, or was just lost in thought. She was getting older, after all. The next evening, around 9, I was watching a movie in the living room. The TV was low, and Buster was snoring beside me. My eyes drifted across the street, as they often did. Mrs. Gable's living room light was on, and she was in her usual armchair, facing the window. She was just sitting there. No book, no TV, no movement. Just sitting. It was dark outside, but her house light illuminated her profile. Her head was tilted slightly, and it looked like she was staring directly at my house. It felt unnerving, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe she liked looking out at the night. People do that, right? I tried to shake off the feeling. A few more days passed, and things just got quieter. Mrs. Gable's car, a beige sedan, was always parked in her driveway, never moved. Her mail started piling up in the mailbox. No garden work, no neighborhood walks, none of her usual activities. My mom, who knew Mrs. Gable better, mentioned she hadn't seen her at the grocery store or church. She must be feeling unwell. My mom speculated, suggesting she'd go check on her later, but my mom got busy, and it slipped her mind. I kept seeing Mrs. Gable through the window, sometimes just sitting, other times standing in the kitchen, motionless, bathed in the soft glow of her overhead light. It was always still, always quiet. Then came the day I got home from my shift, around midnight. The streetlights cast long, stark shadows. Buster needed to go out, so I took him on a quick loop. As we passed Mrs. Gable's house, I noticed something. Her front door was ajar. Not wide open, but definitely not latched. Just a narrow sliver of darkness, about an inch or two wide. My stomach dropped a little. This wasn't just unwell. This felt wrong. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? My elderly neighbor's door is slightly open, and she's been acting quiet? They'd think I was crazy. I decided to wait until morning. Maybe a gust of wind had pushed it open. Maybe. The next morning, the door was still ajar. The recycling bins were still out. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Taking a deep breath, I walked across the street, Buster straining on his leash. I pushed the door open slowly, calling out, "Mrs. Gable? Are you okay?" The house was silent. A thick, oppressive silence that seemed to absorb all sound. It smelled faintly of something metallic, something vaguely sweet and sickly. I took a step inside, peering into the living room. It was neat, undisturbed, but a fine layer of dust seemed to have settled over everything, even in just a few weeks. Felt abandoned despite the signs of life. "Mrs. Gable?" I called again, my voice barely a whisper this time. Buster whined, tugging me toward the staircase. The banister felt cold under my fingers as I ascended, each creak of the old wood echoing in the stillness. I found myself in the hallway upstairs. 2 doors, one leading to a bathroom, the other to her bedroom. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pushed it open slowly. The room was dim, curtains drawn. The air was heavy, stagnant. I scanned the room, seeing nothing out of place. The bed was made dresser tidy, but the smell was stronger here, almost dizzying. Then I saw her, in the far corner of the room behind a tall, antique wardrobe. She was facing the wall, perfectly still, standing bolt upright. Her back was to me. She was wearing a simple house dress. "Mrs. Gable?" I asked, my voice trembling. No response. I took a hesitant step closer, my eyes fixed on her unmoving figure. There was something profoundly unnatural about her stillness. No subtle sway, no shift of weight. Like a mannequin, I reached out a hand, intending to gently touch her shoulder, to see if she was just in a deep sleep, or worse. The air around her felt intensely cold, a stark contrast to the stagnant warmth of the room. As my fingers brushed her shoulder, she slowly, glacially, turned her head. Not her body, just her head, twisting at an impossible angle to look at me over her shoulder. Her eyes were wide, milky white, unfocused, and bloodshot. Her mouth hung slightly open, revealing a glimpse of black, shriveled tongue. But what truly froze me was the look in those eyes. There was no recognition, no emotion, no life. Just a hollow, empty gaze that seemed to see right through me, into something far beyond. And then I noticed the faint, dark stain on the back of her house dress, spreading slowly from her neck. It wasn't blood, not exactly. It was more like a growing patch of deep, dark mold. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet. A choked scream caught in my throat. Buster, who had been whimpering, now barked frantically, pulling me towards the door. I scrambled out of the house, slamming the front door shut, the sound echoing through the silent street. I didn't stop running until I was safe in my own living room, gasping for breath, Buster licking my face. The police came, of course. My parents had called them after seeing my terrified state. They found her just as I had, and they found more. The entire house was riddled with an aggressive, blackish-green mold, growing not just on the walls, but on furniture, clothes, even inside the refrigerator. It was like the house itself was decaying from the inside out, taking Mrs. Gable with it. The official report listed it as a tragic accident, a very aggressive and rare fungal infection that had overtaken her system and her home. But I know what I saw. I know the way she moved, or rather didn't move, the way her head twisted, the dead, empty gaze in those eyes. They cleaned out the house, sanitized everything, but it sat empty for months. No one wanted to buy it. Sometimes, late at night, I still look across the street. And I swear, sometimes, I see a faint light in her living room, and a silhouette in the window, perfectly still, just sitting there staring. Not at the street, but directly at my house. And I wonder if it's the mold that's still watching. Or if it's something else, something that came back in the shape of Mrs. Gable, just wrong. Sometimes the most terrifying things aren't the monsters under the bed. but the subtle shifts in the daylight, the small changes in the routine next door. It's the creeping realization that the ordinary can suddenly become other. And once that seed of doubt is planted, it tends to grow. My older sister, Emily, always hated the pool, even though our house had one. She'd complain about the chlorine, the bugs, the way her hair felt afterwards. But when she came back from college for summer break, she bought this ridiculously oversized inflatable flamingo float, bright pink and nearly big enough for 2 people. It just sat there in the deep end, day after day, a splash of unnatural color against the blue tile. It was weird because she never used it. She never even went near the water. It was just there, always floating in the same spot, rocking almost imperceptibly with the breeze. I was 16 that summer and Emily was 20. She'd been gone for a year at university across the state, and I'd missed her. We'd always been close, but when she came home, something was off. She was quieter than usual, spent most of her time in her room with the door closed, listening to music through headphones. Her usually lively eyes seemed distant, like she was looking through me. My parents just put it down to her being tired from exams or adjusting to being back home. I tried to talk to her, but she'd just offer vague, short answers, then turn back to her phone. My room was right next to Emily's, so I heard everything. Or rather, I heard the lack of everything. Her room used to be a hub of activity, late-night phone calls, giggling with friends. Now it was just silence, except for one thing. Every night, around 2 a.m., I'd hear a soft, almost imperceptible thud from her room. Not a loud bang, just a dull, heavy sound, like something being placed gently on the floor. It was always followed by the faint creak of her door opening, then closing. I'd never hear footsteps in the hall or a flush from the bathroom, just that thud and the door. One morning, I went downstairs for breakfast and noticed something odd. On the perfectly dry tile floor leading from the back door to the living room, there were faint, damp footprints. They were bare footprints, small and narrow, definitely Emily's size. But it hadn't rained, and nobody had been in the pool that morning. It was still too early, and the water was cold. I looked at them for a minute, then tried to convince myself that maybe Mom had spilled something, or Dad had walked in with wet shoes. But the prints were too distinct, too isolated. I wiped them away with a paper towel and tried to forget about it. A few nights later, that thud woke me up again. I glanced at my alarm clock, 2:17 a.m. I lay there, listening, and heard the usual soft creak of her door. A minute passed, then another. The house was utterly silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. Something felt wrong. I got up, walked to my window, and looked down at the pool. The moon was nearly full, casting a silver sheen on the water. And there, in the deep end, was the pink flamingo float. But it wasn't rocking. It was completely still, almost submerged, as if something heavy was pressing it down into the water. A chill ran down my spine. Even though it was a warm summer night, I watched the float, not breathing. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, it began to rise, shedding water in glistening sheets. It bobbed back up to the surface, looking exactly as it always did, pristine and bright pink. As it settled, small, circular ripples fanned out from its edges across the moonlight-dappled water. It was like watching a perfectly still lake suddenly have a stone dropped into it, except no stone had been dropped, and no one was there. I just stared, my heart pounding, trying to find a rational explanation for a float that had just been pushed underwater by an invisible force. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I confronted Emily. I asked her why she never used the pool. She just looked at me, a blank expression on her face, and said, "It's cold at night." That was it. No explanation about the float, no real interest in my question. Later that afternoon, I was walking past her room, and her door was slightly ajar. I glanced in and saw her lying on her bed, facing away from me. Her hand was dangling off the side of the bed, near a small, ornate wooden box that sat on her nightstand. And her hand, even in the dim light, looked pale, almost translucent. Later that night, the thud came again. This time, I knew exactly what it was. I crept out of my room and peered through the crack in Emily's door. She wasn't in her bed. The wooden box from her nightstand was open, and it looked empty. I heard a faint splashing sound from outside. I moved to my window, heart hammering against my ribs. The flamingo float was submerged again, deep in the water, a dark, vague shape beneath the surface. I watched as it slowly, eerily rose, and this time I saw it, just for a second, a pale, slender hand, slick with water, pull itself out from beneath the float before disappearing into the darkness of the pool. I screamed. Not a loud scream, just a choked gasp. My parents came running. They found me shaking, pointing at the pool. They said there was nothing there, just the float. The next morning, Emily was gone. Her room was empty, her clothes, her books, everything. She hadn't packed a bag. The wooden box was gone too. My parents were frantic, called the police, but there was no trace. No note. Nothing. The police found her car still in the driveway. The only thing left was the pink flamingo float, still in the pool, still rocking gently. But now, when it dipped and swayed, it seemed to carry a strange, unnatural weight, as if it was holding something down. I haven't been able to look at that pool the same way since. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that soft thud. And if I force myself to look out the window, I can almost make out a faint, pale reflection in the deep end, just beneath the surface, staring back up at the moon. It's not Emily. Not really. But it's the shape of her, distorted and still, waiting for the cover of night to finally rise. And I know, with a chilling certainty that turns my blood to ice, that the pool isn't just a pool anymore. It's a grave, and something in it still remembers how to breathe. The world is full of things we don't understand, forces just beneath the surface of our awareness. Sometimes the most suffocating dread comes from something vast and inescapable, something that presses down, slowly, relentlessly, until you can barely breathe. The kitchen chair, the one Dad always sat in at dinner, was pulled out from the table just slightly, like someone had been about to sit down, then changed their mind and walked away. Only it had been like that for 3 weeks now. I was 22, fresh out of college, back living with my mom in our old house, trying to figure out what came next. Dad had passed away suddenly from a heart attack, the kind that just takes someone in their sleep. It had been brutal on Mom and honestly on me too. The house felt too big, too quiet, filled with ghosts of routine. My dad's home office, a room he meticulously kept organized, became a sort of shrine. Mom couldn't bear to touch it, so it stayed exactly as he left it. Papers stacked neatly on his desk, his reading glasses beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. I'd walk by it sometimes, late at night, and just glimpse into the darkness. It was comforting in a strange way, a tangible link to a life that had been. One evening, I was walking past, and I noticed the scent. It was faint at first, like damp soil, something you'd smell after a summer rain, but indoors. I figured Mom had been watering her plants. A few days later, the smell was a bit stronger, definitely originating from Dad's office. It was a rich, earthy scent, like digging in a freshly turned garden bed. I also noticed something else. A small framed photo of me as a kid, usually placed on the corner of his desk, was now angled slightly, facing the doorway. It was a tiny detail easily dismissed. Maybe Mom had been in there, finally starting to clear things out. But she hadn't mentioned it, and she'd been pretty clear about not wanting to disturb his space yet. I pushed the photo back into its original position and left the door ajar. The smell persisted, growing deeper, more pervasive, like the whole house was slowly being infused with the scent of damp earth. It started to cling to the curtains, to the furniture near the office. I also noticed a slight dampness on the carpet just outside the office door. Not a puddle, but a subtle, almost imperceptible moisture that made the carpet feel cooler underfoot. I checked for leaks, inspected the window, but found nothing. It was baffling. I mentioned it to Mom, and she just sighed, blaming the old house settling, or maybe a pipe in the walls. We both avoided the topic, as if speaking it aloud would make it more real. One morning, I went to make coffee and found Dad's favorite ceramic mug, the chipped one he always used, sitting clean on the drying rack. My heart leaped. Mom must have finally decided to wash some of his things. I asked her about it, expecting her to confirm, maybe even tear up a little. But she looked at me with confusion. She hadn't touched his mug, hadn't been in the office at all. She still couldn't bring herself to go in there. We just stared at each other for a long moment, the unsaid hanging heavy between us. The earthy smell, stronger than ever, seemed to pulse from the closed office door. That night I couldn't sleep. The smell was everywhere now, a heavy, cloying scent that felt like it was pressing in from the walls. I lay in bed, listening. The house was usually full of tiny creaks and groans, but tonight it was unnervingly silent. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound from Dad's office. It was soft, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging lightly across wood, or maybe something being gently pushed across the carpet. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was just the house, the pipes, anything but what my mind was already whispering. I pulled the blankets tighter, trying to disappear. The scratching stopped for a moment, then resumed, a little louder this time, more deliberate. It was coming from inside the office. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I knew I had to check. Slowly, I swung my legs out of bed, the floorboards cold under my feet. The hallway was pitch black, but a sliver of light from the street lamp outside cast long shadows. I crept towards the office door, my hand reaching for the knob, hesitating. The smell was overwhelming now, a raw, almost metallic dampness that made my stomach churn. I could hear a faint, wet shushing sound from within. I pushed the door open, just a crack. The room was dark, but my eyes quickly adjusted to the faint light filtering in from the window. The scratching had stopped. The air in the office was thick, cold, and heavy with that potent, earthy smell. My gaze went to the desk where Dad's glasses lay, but they weren't where he'd left them. They were on the floor, next to his chair, which was now fully pulled out, facing the window. And on the carpet, directly beneath where his feet would have been, was a small, unmistakable pile of dark, damp soil. Not much, just a few handfuls, but undeniable. My eyes darted to the soil, then across the room, searching. The window was closed and locked. No animal could have brought it in. Then I saw them. Faint, dark smudges on the light-colored carpet, leading from the pile of soil, across the room, and stopping just short of the doorframe. They looked like wet footprints, small and oddly shaped, as if someone had walked through mud, then carefully made their way out. But they were facing inwards, as if someone had walked into the room from the hallway, tracked soil, then turned around to face the desk. I backed away slowly, pulling the door shut, my breath catching in my throat. The smell of wet earth followed me back to my room, clinging to my clothes, to my skin. The next morning, Mom noticed the smell too. She finally opened the office door, and I watched her face drain of color as she saw the small pile of dirt. We called an inspector, then a plumber, then an exterminator. They found nothing. No leaks, no pests, no signs of intrusion. We threw out the carpet, scrubbed the walls, aired out the house for days. The smell eventually faded, but it never really left. Sometimes, late at night, I still catch a phantom whiff of damp soil, and I wonder about that chair in the kitchen, always pulled out just a little too far. I wonder who was sitting there, quietly, and where they went, or if they ever truly left. We all have our secrets, our private burdens. But what happens when the very ground beneath your feet seems to hold a secret of its own? When the earth itself feels like it's remembering something terrible and trying to tell you about it. The back door was always locked, deadbolt and chained. But that night I felt a distinct chill drift from underneath it, even though the central heating was on full blast. I was 22 then, living alone for the first time in a small, slightly run-down house in the older part of town. The kind of place with original wood floors that creaked and single-pane windows that rattled in the wind. I worked early mornings at a local bakery, so my evenings were usually quiet, just me and whatever book I was trying to finish or a movie I'd fallen asleep to. This particular night, it was just me, the silence, and that strange, pervasive cold. I'd moved in about 6 months prior, excited for the independence after college, even if it meant a little extra upkeep. My parents lived a few states over, and my younger sister was still in school, so there wasn't anyone regularly checking in on me. I liked the solitude for the most part, but sometimes, especially late at night, the quiet felt less like peace and more like a void. It was the kind of house that made you hyper-aware of every settling groan, every branch tapping against the eaves, making you wonder what was really just the house and what wasn't. Around midnight, after turning off my bedroom lamp, I heard a soft, almost imperceptible click from downstairs. It was distinct from the house's usual symphony of creaks. It sounded exactly like the back door latch, the one I had religiously double-checked every night. I told myself it was the wind, or the ancient plumbing, or my imagination playing tricks. I'd grown up in a house that was always making noises, so I tried to dismiss it, pulling the blanket tighter around me and focusing on regulating my breathing. But the sound had snagged something in my mind, a tiny thread of unease. A few minutes later, there was another sound, this one less deniable. A faint thud, like something heavy being set down on the kitchen floor, followed by a soft, dragging scrape. My heart started to beat faster, a dull drum against my ribs. I lay completely still, straining to hear over my own pulse. Then, distinct footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the kitchen, then into the dining room. They weren't heavy like a man's, nor light like a child's, but somewhere in between, shuffling almost. It was too quiet, too careful to be an animal, and definitely not the wind. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? My house is making noises? I didn't want to be that person. I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe I'd left a window open, and something had blown in. But the sounds had a deliberate quality, a purposefulness that chilled me to the bone. Then I heard a whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakably human. It wasn't a scream or a plea. It was a low, breathy murmur, like someone talking to themselves just out of earshot. It seemed to come from the living room directly below my bedroom. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to make sense of it. I told myself it had to be a dream, a nightmare. I counted to 100, then opened my eyes. The house was utterly silent now, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, paralyzed, listening to nothing but the frantic beat of my own heart. The air in my room felt colder now, as if whatever had been downstairs had sent an icy tendril up the stairs. I knew I needed to check, but every fiber of my being screamed at me not to move, not to make a sound. Eventually, the need to know overrode the terror. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial 911, and slowly, carefully, crept out of bed. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, each creak amplified in the oppressive stillness. I made my way down the stairs, every shadow seeming to stretch and writhe. When I reached the kitchen, the back door was indeed open, just a crack, letting in a sliver of inky blackness from the yard. The deadbolt was thrown, the chain undone, dangling uselessly. My stomach lurched. I distinctly remembered locking everything, every single night without fail. And then I saw it. On the old linoleum floor just inside the back door was a single muddy footprint. It wasn't fresh and wet, but dried and faint, almost like it had been there for a while, perhaps left by someone who had walked into the house, then back out much earlier. It was small, too small to be a man's, perhaps a woman's. But what really made my blood run cold was the distinct, unmistakable pattern of the sole. A worn-out tread that looked exactly like the old pair of garden boots my mother used to wear when she visited, the one she always left by the back door when she came over to help me with the yard work. I stood there, frozen, staring at that footprint, my mind racing. My mother hadn't visited in months. She lived hundreds of miles away. Couldn't be her. But the whispers, the careful movements, the familiar tread, I knew with a sickening certainty that the sounds I had heard weren't of an intruder. They were of someone who belonged there, someone who knew the house, someone who had simply let themselves in. And the whispers I'd dismissed as imagination, they were too familiar now. They were her voice, calling my name, just out of reach, just out of sight, like she was always there, just beyond the edge of perception. I left the house that night, grabbed a few things, and drove straight to a hotel. I called my mom the next morning, my voice shaking, but I didn't tell her why. I just made up an excuse about a pipe bursting. She sounded exactly like herself, cheerful and busy, completely normal. I sold the house 3 months later, taking a significant loss. I never went back in after that night, not even to pack the rest of my things. I still feel that cold draft sometimes, even in my new place, and I still hear that faint whisper, just at the edge of hearing, reminding me that some things, once they come back, never truly leave. These stories, they linger, don't they? Not because of any grand spectacle, but because they tap into the quiet, nagging fear that the mundane can shatter without warning. That the safety we build around ourselves is just an illusion. The real horror isn't always a monster in the dark, but the slow, chilling realization that the darkness was always there, just waiting for us to notice. That's why these tales stay with you, long after the screen goes dark. If you want to keep exploring the quiet terrors of the everyday, consider subscribing to Scareverse for a new story every week.